A man who trusted almost no one trusted this machine with his life. Saddam Hussein, a ruler who slept in a different bed most nights, who feared his own generals, climbed into one specific Mercedes when he needed to be seen and stay breathing at once. It was armored against bullets, yet its roof folded open on purpose, so crowds could watch him stand and wave. A fortress that also put him on display, protection and exposure welded into a single black limousine. Here's the part nobody expects. That car outlived him. It escaped a falling country, slipped across a guarded border, and survives to this day, while the dictator who owned it does not. Ever seen an object that carried more history than the person who sat in it? Stay with me. This one has a strange resting place. To understand the machine, you first have to understand the exact model, because Saddam didn't just buy a Mercedes. He bought the rarest and strangest version of the most exclusive car on earth. The base was a Mercedes-Benz 600, the Grand Mercedes, the hand-built limousine that answered to no budget, the car reserved for kings and presidents. But Saddam's wasn't the standard limousine. His was a Landaulet. If you enjoy forgotten British car stories like this, consider subscribing. There are many more coming every week, and the Landaulet is a peculiar thing. The front half has a solid, fixed roof, exactly like a normal car. The rear half does not. Behind the driver, the roof folds away completely, leaving the back seat open to the sky. Fewer than 60 of these were ever made across nearly 2 decades, which makes it one of the rarest body styles Mercedes ever produced. Now ask yourself why a car like that exists. Why would anyone pay a fortune for a limousine with half a roof missing? The answer is simple, and it's the key to this whole story. A Landaulet exists to be seen into. It was built for one purpose, so that a powerful passenger could stand up in the back, rise above the crowd, and let thousands of people look upon his face as he rolled slowly past. It is a rolling stage, a throne that moves. And here is the contradiction that defines Saddam Hussein completely. This was a man consumed by fear. He was known to sleep in a different location from one night to the next, so that no one could ever be certain where he lay. He surrounded himself with body doubles, men who resembled him closely enough to stand in his place and absorb a bullet meant for him. He purged his own inner circle when suspicion took him, executing men who had served him loyally for years. Trust, for Saddam, was a weakness he could not afford. And yet that same terrified man deliberately chose the one car on the planet designed to lift him up and expose him to the masses. He wanted armor to keep him alive. He also wanted to be adored, and he found a single machine that promised him both at once. But that strange body style hides an even stranger fact, because Saddam was very far from the only man who chose it. Look at the list of people who owned this exact type of car, and you will find something genuinely unsettling. The same rare shape carried both the holiest man alive and some of the cruelest men of the century. The most famous Landaulet of all was black, and it was built for the Pope. Paul VI rode through vast crowds in his open-topped 600, standing in the back, blessing the faithful, the fresh air on his face, as hundreds of thousands looked on with love. That car now sits, preserved and honored, in the Mercedes Museum in Germany. Mechanically, it was the same machine Saddam Hussein chose for himself. The car of the gentlest man on earth, and the car of one of the harshest, rolled off the same production line, shaped by the same German hands. And the Pope was in strange company. The Mercedes 600 became, across the 60s and 70s, the unofficial car of absolute power everywhere on earth, good and evil alike. Fidel Castro had one, so did Chairman Mao. Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines owned 4 of them. The rulers of North Korea, father and son, treasured theirs. Even Pol Pot, whose regime murdered a fifth of his own nation, rode in the same German limousine. Why did they all, without fail, choose this one car? Because it said something no other machine could say. In an age when a Rolls-Royce meant merely that you were rich, the 600 meant something colder, that you were untouchable. It was so expensive, so exclusive, so obviously beyond the reach of ordinary wealth, that owning one placed you in a tiny brotherhood of people who ruled rather than earned. It was less a car than a credential, a passport stamped only for those who answered to no one. For a man like Saddam, who had clawed his way to total control of a nation and intended to keep it by any means, that message was irresistible. He didn't want a car that said he was wealthy. He wanted a car that said he was beyond challenge, so he took the rarest version of the ultimate symbol of power. And then he had it altered, quietly, for the one thing it couldn't yet do: keep him alive. Here is where the limousine stops being a symbol and becomes a survival machine. A standard 600, for all its grandeur, was built to protect a passenger from discomfort, not from bullets. Saddam needed more. So his Landaulet was fitted with armor plating, turning the elegant parade car into something closer to a mobile bunker dressed in a tailored suit. And the 600 was one of the very few cars on Earth that could take it. Adding armor to a vehicle means adding enormous weight. Thick steel in the doors, heavy glass, reinforcement hidden throughout the body. Most cars would sag and struggle under that burden, their engines gasping, their suspension collapsing. But the 600 was born with monstrous strength in reserve. Its vast, hand-built engine and its extraordinary suspension could shrug off the extra load and still glide as if nothing had changed. The very over-engineering that made the car so absurdly expensive was exactly what made it perfect for a frightened man. It had been built to carry the weight of protection without ever letting the passenger feel it. Then came the details that tell you exactly how this car was used. Along its sides, it carried running boards, narrow steps built into the bodywork, and grab handles. Those were not for decoration. They were there so that members of his elite Republican Guard could physically ride on the outside of the moving car, clinging to its flanks, forming a living wall of armed men around their leader as he passed through the streets. Picture that. A gleaming black Mercedes, roof folded open, the dictator standing tall in the back to be admired, and wrapped around him, hanging off the car itself, a cage of soldiers watching every window and every rooftop for the shot that might come. That single image contains the whole psychology of the man. The desperate need to be seen, and the equally desperate need to survive being seen. Both, at the same time, in the same machine. And there is one final detail that reveals the truth of it. After decades in Saddam's possession, the odometer on this car reads just over 5,000 kilometers. 5,000 in all those years. This was never a car he drove. It was a stage he was presented upon, wheeled out for the great occasions, the parades, the moments when the nation was made to watch him tower above them, then return to its place of safety. It wasn't transport. It was a throne with an engine. For years, that throne did its job. Saddam ruled and was feared and was seen. And then, in the spring of 2003, the entire world he had built around himself began to fall apart, and his most trusted machine suddenly had to run for its own life, without him. When Baghdad fell, Saddam's empire of possessions was torn apart. His palaces were stormed, his garages, and he had extraordinary garages, stuffed with exotic and armored cars collected over decades, were looted and, in most cases, destroyed. The symbols of the regime were smashed by the very people who had lived under them, and a great deal of that fleet simply ceased to exist. Burned, stripped, wrecked. But this one car did not die with the regime. Somehow, in the chaos, one man saw a chance. Think about what that took. All around him, the crowd was destroying everything that carried the dictator's name, smashing statues, torching palaces, tearing apart the very cars that had once rolled past them, carrying the man they had feared. To be caught saving one of those cars, in that moment, was dangerous. Anything linked to Saddam was poison. And yet one man looked at this rotting but priceless machine and decided it was worth the risk. Not to worship it, but perhaps simply because he understood that an object like this should not be allowed to vanish. An Iraqi businessman got hold of the Landaulet, and he made a decision to get it out of the country. Not to a museum, not to safety exactly, just out, before it could be destroyed like the rest. And what happened next is a story even the experts can only half tell. which is precisely what makes it so believable. He drove it toward the border with Jordan, and somehow, a 4-ton, 21-foot, instantly recognizable limousine that had belonged to the most hunted man in the world got across that guarded frontier. The curator, who later handled the car, put it plainly. There was, he suspected, a long conversation with the border guards, followed by an exchange of some sort. Money, most likely. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody can prove the details. A car once used to display absolute power slipped over a border in the dark, saved by a bribe and a nervous businessman, and vanished into Jordan. Then, in 2006, it surfaced in the strangest possible place. The Mercedes distributor for Jordan and Syria contacted a famous car museum in Los Angeles and, in effect, said, "Have I got a car for you?" When the museum's people flew over to look, they found it under a canvas tarp, in an ordinary dealer's lot, parked among run-of-the-mill family Mercedes, the small, sensible cars that ordinary people buy. The throne of a dictator, hidden under a sheet, surrounded by hatchbacks. A deal was done. The car was bought and shipped across the world to America, and the man who had trusted it with his life would never know it had escaped, because by the time it reached its new home, he had already met his end. While the car was quietly crossing borders and hiding under tarps, its owner's story was ending in the opposite way. In the full glare of the world's cameras, Saddam Hussein was captured in December 2003, dragged from a cramped hole in the ground near a farmhouse, unwashed and defeated, about as far from a man standing tall in an open limousine as it is possible to imagine. He was tried, and in 2006, he was executed. Think about the contrast for a moment, because it is the heart of this entire story. The man built a machine to make himself look immortal. He armored it, guarded it, stood upon it, so the world would see him as untouchable. And in the end, the machine proved more durable than the man. He was pulled from a pit and hanged. The car glided quietly to safety and survived. The limousine he trusted with his life kept living after his was over. A machine of steel and leather proved more loyal to its own survival than any of the men he had trusted, or feared, or killed to stay in power. And yet its own ending carries a strange, quiet justice. The Mercedes-Benz 600 is regarded, to this day, as one of the greatest luxury cars ever built, voted, by tens of thousands of enthusiasts, the finest classic of its kind. A perfect 600 is a treasure, displayed with pride, worth a fortune. But not this one. This particular car sits in the basement of that Los Angeles museum, and it has sat there for years. It is not on the main floor. It is rarely shown. It remains unrestored, missing some of its original hubcaps, riding on its spare tire, wearing the scars of its escape. The museum has no firm plans to make it beautiful again, because for all its rarity, all its history, all its craftsmanship, the shadow of the man who owned it is simply too dark. The same object that once meant untouchable power now means something the world would rather not put on display. The greatest luxury car ever made, reduced to a thing kept in the dark because of the single passenger who once stood tall inside it. The throne still exists. The king who once sat upon it does not. Beneath a busy museum in California, that black limousine still waits there in the quiet, armored, rare, and unloved. Now you know its full secret. So tell me below, which car's hidden history should we drag into the light next? Name it. It might be the one we uncover. If you enjoy forgotten British car stories like this, consider subscribing. There are many more coming every week.